I'm sorry.
But
I didn't know I had a job this like this.
Have a job. There will be a quiz at the end. Well, thank you, Ruth, for inviting us to speak tonight. Thank the Town Hall, Historic Town Hall Museum for allowing us to come here and share this evening with you. Thank you for taking your time to come here. I hope I don't bore you too much. Hopefully you come away at least halfway interested in what I have to say. Maybe by the end I'll know some of your names. I think I might be distantly related to some people in here, but when you have as many children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-great-great-grandchildren as one of the guys I'm going to talk about, then it's not unheard of. So again, thank you. I believe what I'm supposed to talk to you about tonight is the book that I wrote. It's called Crystal of the Clouds.
Yes.
Other than Ruth and my wife, is anyone else here read the book? Good. You don't know anything about it. I hope by the time we get done you think to yourself, I'm going to get that book. Because I'm not going to tell you everything that's in the book. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what's going on. My name is Leonard Mowry. I've been mainly in the public service as a firefighter for the last near 30 years. I retired 2 weeks ago. So now I'm without a job. So I work for Beans. That was a good career. I'm also heading up, directing a new organization called Church Camp Ministries. And feel free to take one of the flyers before you leave. It's a new organization looking to put a camp up in North Florida, non-denominational, so many of the churches can come and use it. That's enough about me. You didn't come here to hear about me. You came here to hear about the book. This is Leonard Stewart Mowry. Leonard Stewart Mowry is my great-grandfather. He's one of the original founders of this area, original settler down here. He originally was from Indiana, went to Missouri, came down to Louisiana, eventually made his way into Florida and all the way down here to the swamps and mosquitoes that we like to call Homestead. He got 120 acres was his initial homestead here in Florida, in this area. He owned land in many other parts of the state as he moved around, but he farmed. So he came here and did some farming, cleared out a lot of the woods that's out there, and just put up with things that you and I probably wouldn't put up with today when it comes to being a pioneer. How many of you name your home? Yeah, he named his home. You got a name for yours. I want to hear it.
Across.
Okay, he's got it. You were here at my last one, weren't you?
No, I wasn't.
No?
No.
Okay.
Sorry, I missed it.
He named his home Fairview, and it was just 5 blocks west of us, and it was there until after Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew did not blow it down, but it damaged it enough to where it had to be destroyed. So that was the home, Fairview. He probably called it that because anywhere on his wraparound porch he had a fair view. Like I said, that was on his original 120 acres. It was here before Homestead became Homestead. Homestead became a town in 1913, the second incorporated town in Dade County, the first being Miami. So in 1913 they incorporated it, and Leonard S. Mowry, my great-grandfather, was all the way to the right. Then that's his children and wife and everything in the middle of the picture. And the one all the way to the extreme left is my grandfather, Fred Mowry Sr. And that person is the one that married Crystal. And we'll get into that. But he's a young boy in that picture, but the day he turned 18 is the day he married his wife, Crystal. I was proud to be a part of the centennial celebrations here a couple of years ago. They let me join in on the festivities, made me dress up, and it was very fun and very exciting. But if it wasn't for people like Leonard S. Mowry, the Campbells, the Crones, all those names that you have streets named after that came down here many, many, many years ago, we wouldn't be here. So I'm glad that they came here and did what they did. So why a book? I told you I was a firefighter, so why write a book? I didn't set out to write a book. I set out to do family research. I found out there wasn't enough information on the family. So it was a very large family. So I tried to just focus in on certain lines in the family. And I came to the part about my grandfather's first wife. And I had been told as a child she was a daredevil and she was a wing walker. And that's all I ever knew about her. So with that in mind, I started doing a little research. And I found out she was so much more than what people said she was. And I found out that a lot of things they said about her probably were wrong anyway. So I just went looking for the facts. She's a very lovely lady. I wish I could have met her. I'm sure she would have told me many, many things that maybe I couldn't put in the book. So I did some research, researching for the book. It was very challenging. Imagine trying to find information from over 100 years ago and up through the years trying to get some accurate information. It was very enjoyable, though I have to admit I spent probably too many hours not doing things I should be doing and sitting down at a computer or going to a library or researching. It was very satisfying when I was able to come up with answers. When I would discover something I was looking for, it brought great satisfaction. But at the same time, I got new questions. I could write another book if I could ever find the answers to the questions that developed while researching for this book. So it was fun. Newspapers, great resource. Okay, a lot of them are digitalized, and you can find references to them on the internet. They still have microfiche. You go up to the library. I sat in the library and went through those things as well, things that are not digitalized yet. The internet, great resource of information. Not just like county and city libraries, but I contacted some, I guess they would be called personal libraries from organizations, and they were able to give me a little bit of information. Museums. Especially I want to thank the San Diego Air and Space Museum for what they did to help me to put the book together and give me the permission to put the pictures and things that I put in there. And along the way I discovered relatives that I'd never met. Okay, I finally met in December a cousin. His name is Ronald Lewis. He is Crystal's grandson, her only grandson actually. And I met him for the first time in December, and he was able to provide me with a lot of good information. I found him through the internet doing the research, contacted him, and this was before I had even thought about writing a book. And then he tells me, well, I got her journal. Okay, well, she was talking about, and I have a copy of it right here if you want to look through it, a journal that she wrote when she traveled with my grandfather and their daughter from Homestead out to Colorado, day by day documenting their journey. And I found it very interesting. So that gave me a whole new perspective on my grandfather, who I never met, on what he was like too. So I got information. I got great information, and I said, well, I got to preserve this for others. So that's why I wrote the book. For no other reason but preserve a little piece of history that otherwise would have been lost, like so much of our history is, being lost. Crystal's early life, her parents were Con and Carrie Kutch, or Cooch, depending on what side of the family you talk to. He was a circuit rider, a traveling preacher out in what was at that time Indian Territory. You had Oklahoma Territory and Indian Territory before Oklahoma became a state. So that's what he was doing, traveling on horseback, preaching and doing whatever traveling preachers do. In 1900, they had their first child, which was Crystal Viola. And so Crystal was their first child, born in 1900 in a place called Floyd, Oklahoma. Life as a young girl on the Great Plains, if you could just imagine, there wasn't a whole lot to do. There wasn't Game Boys, there wasn't the internet. So what do you think a young girl did? She probably read what she could. She probably did a lot of daydreaming. And that's how I pictured her, daydreaming, looking at the butterflies and the birds and things and wondering what we'd like to fly. There's stories of her jumping off her father's low roof on the barn, trying to fly. Okay, so she, from early on, her dream was to be a flyer, to somehow fly. She had heard about these things called airplanes. The Wright brothers had done their thing in Kitty Hawk, so news travels that, you know, these people can actually get in these contraptions and fly through the air, but she never actually seen one. Until one day she met her heroine, this lady that she idolized by the newspaper articles that she read about her, and her name was Katherine Stinson. That's a cute girl right there. Now she was probably about 25 when her and Crystal met. Crystal was probably 14. Katherine was going to do some flying exhibitions out in, they had moved from Oklahoma, they're out in Colorado now. And so she was going to do some flying exhibitions out there. So I guess they probably took a train, put the pieces of the aircraft on there, took it out there, maybe took a wagon. So they get to this town and they want to set up and do some flying there and show people, you know, what it was like. The nearest farm was Crystal's farm, Crystal's dad's farm. So he let them set and build the plane out there. Now when I say airplane, okay, this is what I'm referring to. Something like this with just wings and a big motor and you sat on it. That was probably her first airplane that she actually saw. The story goes in the book that Crystal watched them, the men and Katherine put this contraption together, and then she was going to take it up for a test flight. So the next day she would demonstrate to the townspeople. So they got it together. She takes off, and Crystal is watching Katherine fly out, and the plane never climbs high. It stays pretty low, and it never turns. It just went straight. The men thought she was going to circle around and come back and land and say everything's okay, but she never came back. She disappeared over the horizon. So then it's like, where is she? So they were going to go looking for them. Crystal got permission after begging and pleading with her parents to let her get on her horse and go look for Katherine. If you don't mind me reading a little bit, if I can get to it. So she goes out looking for Katherine.
Can you see?
I hope so. The lighting's good. The lighting's not the issue. The eyes are the issue. So she heads out there. She goes out past the irrigation ditch, which is as far out as she has traveled. And this is not Rocky Mountain, Colorado. This is plains and sand dune, Colorado. So she goes out further than she'd ever gone before. And here she is, a little 14-year-old girl alone on her horse. And she got out further than she'd ever gone. And she said, should I go on or should I turn back? She is asking her horse that. A young girl with so much energy, imagination, and dreams may have spent a lot of time talking to her horse as a child. He would never discourage her from dreaming. She hesitated only briefly at this point. She wanted badly to find Miss Stinson. The thought of her lying helplessly in the remnants of her airplane, pinned under a pile of cables and wood and metal and cloth, just pierced Crystal's mind. Is she injured? Is she dead? Even if she was alive, would she be able to move and get back to town? You want to know what happened?
Yeah, what happened?
Buy the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't buy the, I won't make you buy the book. She eventually did go far enough out. She found Katherine. Katherine was okay. The plane was damaged a little bit, but it couldn't fly it back. So she put her on her horse, put her on the seat of royalty, and then Crystal sat in the very back, and they headed back to town. So she saved her hero. Okay, so that was a very interesting story that I got from that. Many years later, there's a big gap in there. That was when she was 14. She wanted to fly, couldn't get money for lessons. She wrote to different people to find out how much it would cost, couldn't afford it. Along around 1921, I'm jumping way ahead, this is Eddie Stinson on the right. That's Katherine's brother, who was also out in Colorado at the same time probably. She finally got to take her first airplane ride with him, because Mommy and Daddy wasn't going to let her go up after that incident with Katherine just flying out over the desert. So that was the person that she said was the first person to take her up in an airplane. That was around 1921. So it was a changing society. You got the pioneers of the early part of that century. What was the mode of transportation? Horseback, or horse and buggy, a wagon. Look at the dress. Now that's my great-grandfather and great-grandmother on the picture on the left. Long dress all the way down to the ground. That's the way you dressed in that Victorian time period. Jump ahead 20 years. That's Crystal with her daughter Evelyn in 1928. And you see the mode of transportation has changed. Okay, now there's vehicles that they can drive around in, and the attire, totally different. Okay, so big change in that period of time. We also went through one World War. Okay, that vehicle, that car, house, that was one of the first motorhomes. My grandfather built that on a Ford chassis, and they lived in that thing as they traveled out to Colorado. Imagine that. I don't think it had too many miles to the gallon. There were not that many paved roads going out there at that time. I think most of the paved roads they got here in Florida. But that's in the book too. What do you think of when you think of the 1920s? I think of the Roaring Twenties.
Jazz.
What was that?
Jazz.
Jazz. At least something good came out of the 20s. Prohibition,
Yes.
gangsters, women's suffrage. All this was going on at that time. So here's Crystal trying to raise a family. Her dreams of becoming a pilot weren't happening. Okay, like I said, when my grandfather turned 18, that day they married. Eventually, Crystal and the family, they moved here to South Florida, and that's where they met the Mowrys. And so he turns 18, they get married, they're going to be farmers down here in Homestead. So they move down here. Things don't work out that well. They have a child. Farming doesn't go all that well over a number of years. So Fred and Crystal decide we need a change. So he had built this motorhome, and they headed to Colorado. Make a long story short, they get out there. Things weren't any better out there. Plus it was cold. Okay, if I'm going to be suffering, I want to be suffering where it's a little bit warmer. So they eventually make their way back to South Florida. Things don't go very well for them as a family. They end up divorcing. Okay, so now that's pretty much her life in a nutshell up to that point. One child. She's divorced now, but she finally has an opportunity to fly. And she goes about it a very difficult way. She was home one day in Miami at her parents' house reading the newspaper, came across an article where a gentleman named Ralph Douglas was going to do an exhibition parachute jump at one of the Hialeah airfields. So she's like, I have nothing else to do. Let me go over there and watch him. So she goes over to the Hialeah airfield. He goes up. He's doing his jump. They're passing around a hat down for a collection of people to put in the collection for it. And she hears someone in the audience say, he makes a lot of money doing that. So she thought, aha, that's how I'll make money to get my pilot's license, to be able to take the lessons and earn that pilot's license. So the very next day she goes back to that same airfield. She goes up to the owner, Sam Belcher, and she tells him, I want to jump out of the airplane. I want to do it, and any money I make can go towards the pilot's license that I want you to give me. And he's like, well, I'm not going to let you do that. You know, have you ever jumped out of a plane before? No. Have you ever even been up in a plane before? Well, one time. You know, so he's like brushing her off. I'm not going to let you do that. But she is a very persistent lady. In the research that I found, going through it, she had to be a very persistent lady to do the kinds of things she did. Finally, probably to get her off of his back, he agrees. He says, if you go up right now in this airplane and jump out of it, I'll let you jump next Sunday. She agreed. Okay, so Ralph Douglas, the guy who jumped out of the airplane, felt a little obligated, so he was going to help her out. So he told her a little bit about how it works, the parachute, described what they were going to do, and they went on up. It was a pilot, and it was Ralph, and it was Crystal. And they went up, I think I say in the book, about 3,000 feet, something like that. And this wasn't a parachute that you wore. It was a parachute that was tied out on the wing. And she had a harness. So she had to leave the safety of the cockpit, crawl out on the wing, attach that to her harness, and then jump. And it wasn't one that you pulled the cord. The way this thing worked, when you jumped, a rope deployed it for you. So you didn't have to pull anything. So Ralph felt guilty about her being up there, since it was him that she saw and sort of got her to do it. So he goes out. He said, I'm going to go with you. So they're up there, the three of them. Two of them go out on the wing. She gets the parachute on her back, and there's a slip knot that has to be pulled in order for the rope to actually have to deploy the parachute. So Ralph says, you don't have to worry. All you have to do is jump. I'll pull the slip knot, and the parachute will open. So when they got to where they needed to be over the airport, the pilot gunned the motor to let them know it's time to jump, and she jumped before Ralph was ready. And then she's dangling. This is not her, but this is probably what it looked like as she dangled under the wing of that biplane, wondering why she's dangling under the wing of the biplane. She looks up and she sees that the knot slipped out of Ralph's hand and he couldn't reach it, but she could reach it. So she reaches up and surprised everyone that day by, number one, not fainting, but number two, by pulling that thing and deploying the chute and floating down to earth. So that's how she started raising money to become a pilot. Her parachute jumping was not what she set out to do, but she kind of enjoyed it. And she did many, many, many parachute jumps. That's her fourth from the left. This picture was in the 1930 All-American Air Maneuvers here in Miami. And her and 13 others all jumped out of that big Sikorsky rapid succession and deployed their parachutes and floated down. And she said that was one of the most memorable jumps she ever did, because her and her buddies were able to talk and everything as they were drifting down to earth. Parachute jumping was just a side that she did, but she continued doing it at least up until the late 1930s, if not 1940s, at exhibitions. She didn't earn a lot of money there. She had to get other jobs to be able to get the money. She eventually got her pilot's license. The 1930s, that's the golden age of flight. If you look at it, everything was happening back at that point. There's an article up here with her in it, down this right-hand corner, on some records that she set, and that guy right there is Howard Hughes. So think of some of the people that were going to these air shows at that time. There were a lot of air shows. Who's this guy?
Rickenbacker.
Eddie Rickenbacker. Okay, that's who our Rickenbacker. She gets a bonus. He was a World War I flying ace. He was at all these air shows, the national air races and things like that. He loved going to those things and doing it. What else was he known for? Remember Eastern Airlines? Okay. He's the one that took it, developed it into a successful business for all those years, and as long as he was at the helm, it was a success. What about this guy? Doolittle, the Doolittle Raiders. That was another one that showed up to all these air shows. He was a stunt pilot. He was a racer when he wasn't fighting the Japanese and everyone else, okay? James Doolittle was at these air shows, the same air shows that Crystal would go to. And of course, you know Amelia Earhart, another one of Crystal's contemporaries. And if someone ever would write a book about this lady, I'd definitely buy it. This is Annette Gibson. Annette and Crystal were best friends. Annette had an alligator in her house she kept in Coral Gables. She was very eccentric, very interesting lady. I would love to have heard her stories. She had like 5 or 6 husbands. Anyway, something like that. Interesting. One of them, you'll read in the book, was 40 years older than her. I don't know if she liked marrying older people, but maybe that's how she... He hit on it. But she was a flyer also. And I can't prove it yet, but that's one of my unanswered questions. I believe that Annette had a charter airline company out of Fort Lauderdale. I think Annette was running the Fort Lauderdale airport for a while, and I believe that Crystal might have flown for her towards the end, but I haven't verified that yet. It was a wonderful time to fly. Again, the All-American Air Maneuvers were held annually in Miami from the early 1930s or late 1920s up until 1940, 1941. Then we get into war. The national air races were held in Cleveland every year. That was the big one, the big draw that everyone went to see it. They did the pylon races. Okay, you're familiar with that? They're these big towers set out in the open area, and they might be several miles around, and there was grandstands. People sit there and watch these planes race around these pylons. They still do it in Nevada. The national air races are held out in Reno, Nevada, I believe on an annual basis one of these days. I haven't told my wife, I'm going to make it out there to that.
They also they have a race in Dubai.
I probably won't make Dubai. but I'll
I've seen it on
definitely-
TV, that they have those pylon races in Dubai.
Okay, so you're familiar with what a pylon race is. Crystal would participate in those. She went, won a few. She went to as many of these things as she could. This is her with some of her trophies. The one she's most proud of that she stated was that big one in the middle. That big one in the middle was from the Miami Air Pilots Association, which she was a charter member of. And that was for precision flying. And that was open to men and women. And the second year that they offered it, she won it. And I have some details in the book, but you have to fly, you don't have any watch on, you don't have anything, and before you get in the airplane and take off and do your circuit, you're going to tell them how long it's going to take you, and exactly in minutes and seconds. She came within 16 seconds of what she predicted, knowing how fast her plane would go and everything, and not having a clock on there to make sure she gets there in time. So that was one she was most proud of. Like I said, she won many trophies. A lot of these trophies ended up in the San Diego Air and Space Museum. They had a fire in the women's wing of that museum. And from what I understand, all those trophies were destroyed or gone. So if someday I come across them, I'll bring them back and put them in this museum. Then came war again. Okay, now we're up in, we've gone through the 1930s, we've got the Great Depression. You've got her trying to raise a teenage daughter by herself for the most part. I found out some more information in talking to the family that really it was the grandparents that Crystal maybe didn't participate in raising her one daughter as much as maybe they felt she should. But nonetheless, she was a flyer now. She was a very good flyer. In 1936, at the National Air Show here in Miami, she set 4 world's records in seaplanes for females. 2 in one class of airplanes for height and for altitude and speed, and 2 in another class of seaplane. So she had 4 world records under her belt, even going into the war. She was a member of the Greater Miami Air Patrol, which once the war started became the Civil Air Patrol. And they got absorbed into that. Here in Miami, up there in Miami, the base was base number 7, Coastal Patrol Base. What kind of things do you think the Civil Air Patrol did during the war?
Look for German submarines.
That's what they're known for, okay? And that's what that poster is back there, showing them looking for the U-boats that are out there, torpedoing the ships and things like that. But the Civil Air Patrol not only looked for the U-boats, they rescued down flyers, they rescued boaters. During the war, they would make sure that the camouflage on the facilities was adequate. They'd fly over them and say, oh no, you got to do a better job of camouflage, and what that is. At night, all along the East Coast, we were supposed to be blacked out. Okay, no lights on the coast, because the lights would give the enemy something to see with, to be able to tell where they're at. So they would fly and make sure that everything was blacked out. She was a lieutenant and a pilot in the Civil Air Patrol during World War II. Very honorable thing to do. She was recommended, she was one of only 2 ladies from South Florida recommended to go over and fly airplanes for England when they were actually in the war. But once we got into the war, all that was off, and she stayed here in the States. She was born, like I said, in 1900. So she was 41 when the war started. She's a little older than some of the other female pilots that you might come across. In the book, you're going to see a little paragraph about where she was up in New Jersey in 1931 and had a very good relationship with a police chief up there, and they had a little friendly competition in shooting. And guess who won? Crystal. Crystal whooped him, and that's what it says right here, talking about he was soundly defeated by a worthy adversary. She beat him in the shooting competition. You're going to see in the book where she signed her waiver of liability to the Hialeah airstrip on her first parachute jump, saying, I hereby waive all and any rights or damages that may happen to me on this jump. I know she didn't sign her name right, so maybe that was a legal way that she could get away with it. But they made her sign that before she did the jump. She loved to fly. Okay, that was her ambition from the time she was a young child. That was her goal throughout her life, even trying to raise a family and work that out and the other things she did. Her main emphasis was trying to fly, and she was very good at it. Good enough to establish world records, good enough to win races, good enough to be a commercial pilot in some of the endeavors she was doing. The war got in the way of a lot of things, but she was like an ambassador for Miami. She would go to the different areas and not only help promote aviation, but also tourism for the South Florida area. That's her on top of one of her planes. A couple of years ago, Congress passed a bill, and in May of last year, the President signed it into law, and in December, I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony for the original World War II members of the Civil Air Patrol. Myself and my cousin Ron represented Crystal at the official ceremony in the Capitol. There was a gala, and this one used to have a little laser. I don't know if it does anymore. All the way over to the left is myself, and then my wife Susie, and then a gentleman named Matt, who is the husband to the lady he's standing next to, who is Crystal's granddaughter. Okay, that's Linda. She lives in Tampa. Ron, Crystal's grandson, lives in Utah. That's the big guy right there on the right. And then you have Janet, which is Crystal's great-granddaughter from one of the other siblings that had passed away, and her husband. So we were all in D.C. in this last, in December, to participate in the events there. And it was really a wonderful time. I have a book up here if you don't want to get, if you want to look through it, if you don't mind looking at other people's pictures. We got to meet a lot of people. The gentleman in the top left that I'm giving the book to, that's the National Historian for the Civil Air Patrol, a really wonderful gentleman. He's the one, when I contacted him to find out about Crystal, that told me about the Congressional Gold Medal. I sent him everything I had about Crystal, and he was the one vetting all the members to see if they're eligible. He quickly got back to me and said she's definitely eligible. It's a good thing. So without his help, this wouldn't be up here. Okay, and you get to come up and look at all this later on. On the bottom, the black gentleman was one of the Tuskegee Airmen. There were 2 Tuskegee Airmen at this ceremony, and if you're familiar with that, those were the Black Fighter Squadron that fought over in Europe. He was a Civil Air Patrol member before he went over there. There were, I think, 45 original members of the Civil Air Patrol there receiving their gold medal. And then the rest of us were family members of those that weren't there to share in it. We had a great time there. We set up a table. My wife was a great hostess. We talked to a lot of people, listened to their stories about their flying experiences, got to share about Crystal. Wouldn't have traded it for the world. I was really glad we were able to go there and do that. Her grandson right there, he is a flyer, was a flyer, I guess he still is, with the Navy. He actually fought in Vietnam. The great-granddaughter actually had a pair of Crystal's Civil Air Patrol wings. And with a little bit of pleading, she allowed me to wear them to the Capitol for the ceremony. And I wore them that night at the gala. And I had my cousin Ron pin them on me. So what a privilege that was to wear Crystal's wings. And I'll never forget that. Capitol building, that nonchalant looking guy in the corner was holding a hefty piece of gold in his hand. There's actually only one gold medal. And once it was given to the Civil Air Patrol, and that's former Congressman Wolf, who was also a Civil Air member receiving it, it went there straight to the Smithsonian. So they got it, they ushered it out really fast. So if you get a chance in DC and you go by one of the Smithsonian, probably the Air and Space Museum, you should be able to find the Congressional Gold Medal. Flip through these real quick. I got to meet a lot of people and hand out copies of the book to the cadets, to the wife of the commander, the general who's in charge of all the Civil Air Patrol for the United States. It was really wonderful meeting all the World War II veterans, and that's my most interesting time period, you know, when I look at history, is World War II and that, so I had a really great time. Crystal is a very awesome lady, and I want to read, before I finish up here, one of her poems. She also wrote poems. So we're almost done. You've been a good audience. Let me read this, and then if there's any questions. This is called Inspiration. It says, "Up in the clouds where I long to be, above pastures green and turquoise sea, where the world is like a picture book, where you see the works of God wherever you look. Sailing along in perfect bliss, was there ever a sanctuary so inspiring as this? When you look down on the wonders of your Maker's hand, it is thrilling to live, oh isn't life grand? With each nerve tingle, your whole body thrill. It gives you more courage to do His will. As you look down on His world below, deeds of kindness you long to sow. In each little brooklet and each little tree, divine love and wisdom you plainly see." If you can't tell that she loved to fly, then you haven't been listening to me. Unfortunately, she died in an airplane crash in 1946 on her way to the National Air Races in Cleveland. Little discrepancy about who might have been flying the airplane. It wasn't her airplane. In the book, I put the owner of the airplane, who was a very good flyer himself and also a member of the Civil Air Patrol. I believe he was flying the plane. Rumor handed down through family says that he was uncomfortable flying across country and that he asked her to fly the plane. I don't know. It doesn't say. All I know is they crashed in Tennessee, and her very lively life came to an end at that point. Any questions?
How old was she?
She was 46.
Wow.
Actually, she was buried on her 46th birthday. Buried up in Flagler Cemetery. I got the privilege to go by there and see her gravestone. What other questions do you have while we find some lights? Yes, sir.
I'm a little, you said, let's see, your father was Fred Mowry Jr.?
My father was Fred Mowry Jr.
And
She married Fred Mowry Sr.
That was his first wife?
That was his first wife.
Okay.
I laid out a little bit in the book. She actually married again,
Right.
very briefly.
Uh-huh.
I think her marriage for the second gentleman was only a week or two. It was that quick. It was like divorce number 37
Yeah,
for the county.
yeah.
My grandfather actually married 3 times. His second marriage, like a rebound from her, didn't last very long either.
Uh-huh.
But his third marriage to my grandmother, he married her in, let me think, 1933,
Uh-huh.
and stayed married to her until his death in 1967.
Huh.
He died just a few months after I was born, so I never got a chance
Yeah,
to know him either.
yeah,
So that's how I got here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
What
the
was
reason
her name?
What was whose name?
Your grandmother.
Father,
Um,
third wife.
His third wife is Thelmer, not Thelma, Thelmer Loper. Okay, and her brother was actually one of the first parachuters jumping out over in Europe. And someday I'd like to find out some information about him. But that was Thelmer Loper, and they had my father, Fred Mowry. They had another son, Franklin Alonso, and then this lady graduated with my aunt, Fonstein. We call her Tina. So that's, if you want the names, that's the names.
when did Leonard homestead here? You have a homestead papers?
He was, I'm going to say in 1901, he was in Plant City.
Okay.
And that was where my grandfather was born. Within that, just a year, they were down here. He was down here early part of 1900.
Well, I guess I got a little confused in your speech. It was like, Crystal grew up in Oklahoma.
After World War I, and I'm sorry I didn't make that clear, sometime after World War I, or during the end of World War I, they moved to South Florida.
Her family did.
Her family.
Okay.
She was still probably in high school.
Okay.
And actually they lived in what is Palm Beach County now.
Okay.
But you think, back then, early part, Palm Beach, Broward, Dade, and Monroe was all Dade County.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
My great-grandfather actually lived up in what is now Palatka.
Okay.
It was called East Settlement, East Shore Settlement or something before it became Palatka. He was one of the founding farmers up there. I believe that they met while he was up there farming. In the latter part, after Homestead became Homestead, and he gave part of his land to incorporate Homestead, he moved up to Palatka for a while. Then he came back to Homestead again. He moved around quite a bit.
This is Leonard.
This is Leonard.
Yeah.
Okay, so I believe that Fred met Crystal up in Palm Beach, where she was living with her parents.
Right.
Her father at that point, he put down on, and census were great things too. I went through a lot of census records. He put down as day laborer. Not preacher at that point, day laborer. So he was probably going out and helping clear fields for the farmers and working for the farmers. I think he probably met there. He could have met still doing some preaching.
Yeah. Well, a lot of
Yeah.
times the census records are not accurate.
I know that.
Puts whatever he wants in the occupation. It's
Right.
like, you know, I had an uncle who was a clerk for Pan American World Airways at Dinner Key in the 1940s. And in the 1940 census, it says he's a mechanic.
Yeah.
He wasn't a mechanic. He never fixed airplanes, you know. So it's like, you know, you can't necessarily go by that, you know.
You can't, and like you said, that's just the census taker putting down these things. That's why I found a lot of conflicting information.
Right.
I give a lot of it because of the census taker.
Right.
Spelling of names is not always right.
Oh, right.
Ages
Oh,
are
no.
not always accurate.
No.
But it did help me because this is something I don't tell you in the book. Towards the later years in the 40s, Crystal cheated on her age, and she got younger.
Yeah.
Yeah, she lost a couple of years
Yeah.
there towards the end on her driver's license and things.
Yeah.
But I go back to the original records, and for several census years, they had her age down. Her parents on her grave on the paperwork there put her birth as September 3rd, 1900. So that's what I went by, not what Crystal was doing in 1945.
Right.
She was shaving a couple of years off here and there.
Yeah.
What else do you want to know?
Doris Mowry, who was your grandfather's sister.
Okay.
She married Charlie Little and a son, which I spoke to you about, Sonny. Well, Charles has, in his second wife, have a daughter named Crystal. So it just dawned on me when you were talking, I'm going, oh, that's where they got the name.
Crystal had a sister named Lenny, and another one named Leona. And Leona was fascinating. She was a wave. I haven't got any information about her yet. But I have a sister named Lenny, and she was reading through this journal, and she asked my mom, "Did you name me after this?" And they didn't know who these people were. No, that's not who you named it after.
But it just, you know, it may be circumstance, but they do have a daughter named Crystal.
Tell them to buy the book.
Yeah.
You were asking about where Mowry homesteaded?
I know what it was. Yeah.
It was on 5th.
Northeast corner over
Right.
there, 6th Avenue and Mowry.
Right. It was a shame when it was torn down. It was right next to that auto parts store out there. Yeah.
If anyone had any pictures of it,
140 acres in there.
Yeah.
if anyone has any pictures of that house, recent, when I say recent, from the 1960s on, I'd like to.
So Mowry Drive was named after your father?
After my great-grandfather,
Right.
after Leonard S.
Okay.
Mowry Canal, same way.
Yeah.
And he spelled his name differently.
Well, this is a point of contention. This is a point of contention. Let me tell you the rumor. The rumor is that my grandfather, Fred Mowry, who also held many jobs but worked for the county on the signs, street signs, that he was the one that dropped the E. That's why Mowry doesn't have an E. My name doesn't have an E. That was a rumor I was told, but that's not fact. because I had a great uncle who was killed in a dynamite accident in 1911, which my grandfather would have been 10 years old, 10 years old at that time, and I've gone to his grave in Miami, and it's spelled without an E. So in 1911, at least part of the family was spelling without the E, and Leonard S. Mowry, who sometimes they do attribute an E in there.
Well, in the 1910 census, it's spelled.
Again, we go back to the census taker,
It's spelled-
spelling it any way they want.
That's
Now,
so-
part of the family did have an E in their name. Some of his children kept an E in their name. If you look at some of the records, you can see some of them with an E, some of them without the E.
Yeah,
So,
that's very common.
however, maybe illiteracy was out rampant too. Who knows? But I won't put a whole lot of stock in the way a census taker spells the name.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I've done quite a bit of genealogical research, and it's just, you just take
Right.
not a grain of salt, like a pound of salt. It's like,
But that's where I determined that my grandfather, because he worked for the county putting up street signs, wasn't the one that dropped the E. Because in 1911,
yeah,
Edward Mowry is spelled M-O-W-R-Y.
right.
And also the grave, he's up there, this is in Miami's oldest cemetery, where the Burdines, I think the Tuttles are buried,
That's the one on Second Avenue,
in downtown Miami. I'd have to hunt to
Yeah.
find it again.
17th Street in North Miami, or Second
Yeah,
Avenue.
both my great-grandparents are buried there, Margaret and Leonard,
Uh-huh.
and on their gravestone, they choose to,
M-O-R-W-R-Y.
no
Yeah,
E.
yeah. What's the origin of the name? What ethnic,
I've got, now you're gonna make me go way back, I've heard all kinds of things, mainly English or Irish is what I was told. You look it up, it's the mowers of the field.
You said it came from Indiana originally?
Originally, he was adopted, this is again, something I got to research, he was adopted, he had a brother, so I don't know if that's his name, or an adopted name, or if the adoption even existed.
Yeah.
That's just what I was told, so I haven't been able to go back that far. There are other Mowrys, and if you look, going to the census, trying to get the ages to match, they don't always match. So I'm at a loss to tell you exactly, but he came from Indiana, went to Missouri, married, okay, probably don't tell you about. His wife died, probably complications of childbirth,
Right,
and then the child dies just right after that.
right.
Okay, so,
Not uncommon.
yeah, and then he moves south. In Louisiana, he finds Margaret. What was the age difference? 25 years?
She was 14 or something like that.
Yeah, it's in the book, the ages. Much older he was, but she was young and healthy and provided him a lot of children over the years. So it was fascinating, and like you said, it was very common to wives and children to be lost at birth.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon. Yeah, interesting.
I have a lot of stuff up here. I'd like for you to come look at it, and if it spurs your interest, if you'd
Well, I
like to.
prepare our exciting refreshments.